Welcome back, Flow State podcast listeners. I am so excited because today we are doing a special episode for PMDD Awareness Month. We are so excited to bring you Mandy Rother once again to the podcast so that we can answer all of your burning questions about PMDD. We're diving into things that are about how the Maria PMS Elixir could support you, and way broader than that, just general questions about PMDD, how nutrition can support you, how lifestyle can support you, what you may be experiencing. We're very excited to bring you this episode. And Mandy, thank you so much for joining us again. Real quick, let's do another intro just in case our listeners haven't previously listened to an episode with you.
I'll start by saying I have so many clients that come from this podcast and they say your podcast, and I have to clarify it's not my podcast. I just come on it frequently. So my name again is Mandy Rother, and I'm a functional dietitian by training and have a lived experience with PMDD that really fuels my passion. And I've been a dietitian for many years, decade and a half or so, but been working in the PMDD space now for almost 5 years. We're coming up on our 5-year anniversary as a practice, and I'm just obsessed with this stuff and helping people peel back the layers of what they have going on, piecing together the PMDD puzzle, because I know the impact that it can have on all areas of life. So glad to be back and be answering these questions. There's some juicy ones in here.
And just to clarify too, Mandy is one of our medical advisors, and she has done so much work supporting our formula and helping to educate our community on why these nutrients are so beneficial for women with PMDD. We're so grateful to have her as part of our team, as well as Maria is coming up on our 5th year anniversary. So it's really like we've been building our businesses alongside each other. And it's just been amazing to be able to do that with Mandy. So I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And like I came in and the formulation was already amazing. And we had so much fun just geeking out, like looking at what was working for my clients and tweaking things, refining it. And there's an article on the blog of all the tweaks we made. Was that last year, 2 years ago?
I think it was 2 years ago, which is wild.
Yeah. So that's on the blog if anyone's curious why we changed and what. And now the formulation is even better.
Yeah. And we're always taking into consideration future changes as well. I think that that's so amazing as a small company that we can make those changes quickly and really listen to the feedback. So that's a whole side note. But let's dive into some of these questions that we want to answer today. And again, if anyone out there listening has more questions when we're done, reach out to either one of us. We are more than happy to do more of these episodes like this, where it really is a Q&A with our community and support you however we can. So first question is, this is one we hear a lot. I've been taking supplements for PMDD, but I'm not seeing results. Mandy, why are all supplements not created equally?
Yeah. And as I hear this question, the first thing that pops into my mind is the person asking is like sitting there surrounded in like a pile of supplements, like in the midst of their supplement graveyard, counting all the dollars they've wasted, all the things that haven't worked. And this is one of my favorite questions to answer, because when you're in that space, when you're in the pile of stuff that you've tried, it leads to these feelings of hopelessness, even shame around like, what am I doing wrong? What am I missing? And so I want to bring insight into all the layers that go into this. And even before we get into the specific of like supplement quality and all these things that can play in, is when we zoom out, we have to ask a bigger question. And this is like a little soapbox moment for me, but we have to ask, are we using supplements the way that conventional medicine uses medication? Pill for every ill or a supplement for every symptom. And if that's the approach, and if it is, it's not your fault. Like our brains are hardwired to think that way based on how we operate in society and in the medical system. But if that is the approach, we're missing the bigger picture. And I'm seeing this happening. This is what I mean. I get fired up about it. I see it happening even in the holistic spaces, which really defeats the purpose of functional medicine to begin with. So keep that in mind as we go through. I have like 4 big reasons why supplements may be working, but keep that in the back of your mind. And so we have to understand like the why behind your symptoms, and then use data to guide what supplements you're actually taking. So the first reason relates to that. Like the supplements may not be addressing the underlying imbalances that you actually have. And if it's not addressing that, then they're not going to do anything. They're not going to move the needle, or they may actually make things worse. And this is why I encourage people, like, connect in community, connect in forums, but it often hurts more than it helps to do everything that everyone else is trying and that you're reading. That can just add to that pile of supplements, and it can add to that feeling of hopelessness. And we have to bring in data so we're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall. So that's reason number one.
Yeah, and God, so often I feel like that's what I hear too is people are like, I've tried it all, I've done it all, I've read every Reddit out there, I've done the laundry list, and it's can be so frustrating to not be able to get results.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it's important to kind of strip away that shame and think about that why. Why is this happening? And the second reason, number two, is the form of this, the nutrient or the supplement or the ingredient in that supplement matters. The form matters. Quality is everything. And so you have to choose, not only reputable brands, but the most bioavailable or absorbable forms for your body. So thinking of nutrients, methylated folate instead of folic acid, zinc glycinate instead of citrate, magnesium glycinate. There's other beneficial forms of magnesium, other instead of oxide. And so if we have the wrong form, that can lead to poor absorption. And a lot of people are dealing with poor absorption from gut issues and such. Those supplements either can like not do anything or make symptoms worse in some people. So that would be number two.
Such a common one. People are like, I'm already taking a multivitamin. I'm already, I've gone to Target.
Mm-hmm.
I've picked up my Ollie gummy vitamins.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, that's great. Something's probably better than nothing. But if you're not seeing the results that you're after, yeah, the forms definitely, definitely matter. And that's why you
Yeah.
see some price differences with supplements a lot of the times too, is that these different forms, the more beneficial forms can be pricier and more
Mm-hmm.
expensive, and a good formula is going to have the
Yeah.
right stuff in there for you.
Yeah. Well, and that connects to number three. Sometimes I'll tell clients, like, if you took the dose that you needed of these things in the form of a gummy, it would be like the size of a golf ball or a baseball, right? And so the dose matters. And it's once we've chosen those high quality forms, the next question is, are you actually taking enough to make a difference based on what the research shows, which we'll get into in future questions. So based on research or based on your lab data, are you actually taking enough? Um, and number four, I would say the fourth reason is supplements can't work in a vacuum. They can't work alone. They're powerful tools, but they need to be operating in the right environment to actually work. And this includes, nutrition changes that are well suited to you, personalized to you, rest and your rhythms, even like purpose and spirituality and relationships. All these things factor into our healing journey. And what I see is that some people get stuck in like, what's my protocol? What's the perfect combination of supplements? And it's really such a deeper process than that.
Yeah, even as a supplement brand, we really see a huge importance in people understanding that it's not just the supplement, and your results are going to be amplified by the lifestyle changes that you make, and that is just as important as being consistent with your nutrient replenishment. So it's not just this one fix, it's one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah.
And the amazing part is that these nutrients can start to give you a little bit more energy to be able to implement some of those other things and create mindfulness towards the other lifestyle
Yeah.
changes that can help you get even better results. So amplification across the board from supplements into the lifestyle changes, so important.
Yeah. It all fits into that bigger puzzle. And one of my favorite things to do with a new client is to like create a strategic plan of all the supplements. I get to take them off. Sometimes I'm taking clients off multiple supplements before we're even adding a single one. And a side note for anyone exploring supplements, we'll link to a cycle tracker. And that's another thing of, as you're thinking of the bigger picture, all these lifestyle factors coming in, the supplements you're adding, tracking that along with your cycle and your cycle changes can help bring clarity and actually give new data. This thing worked and this thing didn't work. And that actually tells us about your physiology. So that's something I have every single client do. Everyone listening can do to give more clarity. So then you're not wasting money on things that aren't specifically helping you.
Yeah. This kind of leads into the next question, and it's very similar to what we just talked about. But, people come to us or jump into our comments, and so grateful for everyone providing their experience with our supplement. Feedback is just as important, whether it's positive or negative, for us to be able to know what we can do better, how we can educate better. But we hear a lot like, okay, I took Maria every day for a few months, but I just didn't see the results that I was after. And what are some things that you would tell someone who has been really diligent about taking that foundational nutritional supplement and not seeing the results?
Yeah. And I first want to say, like, again, thinking of this person, of like just emphasizing they took it every single day. And like that is a testament to how they're showing up for themselves, showing up for their body. And it can sting a little bit more when you then still feel stuck. And so, first, no, it's like, it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's typically that we haven't gone deeply enough. And even when you and I connected 5 years ago, as I was gauging, like, ooh, is this a company I want to be involved in with ethics and alignment on our mission? One of the things I was looking for was to make sure that Maria was not promoting this as some magic pill or the end all be all. And that's absolutely not the case. And so what most people don't talk about in the supplement industry is that PMDD or any of these other hormone related conditions that might benefit from something like the Maria elixir, it's not caused by missing a certain supplement or nutrient. Those are important pieces of that bigger puzzle that we were talking about. And so sometimes and often it won't be resolved by adding one thing, even if that one thing is high quality. Instead, Maria and similar high quality products serve as that foundational support, and it can help improve energy, help improve mood stability. That increases that capacity to take those additional steps. And so if you're still dealing with those intense symptoms, then we have to ask, uh, what else is going on? Are we addressing the root imbalances? What are we missing? Are those nutrients being absorbed? And what does that tell us about what we need to look into with gut health? And then there could be all these other underlying factors at play related to the nervous system and brain chemistry, inflammation, all these things. And so I like to say I have respect for PMDD. It's kind of a beast. It's layered. It can be complex. And it's always, always deeply individual. And so again, we're talking about foundational support. If Maria didn't work, it just means that your body needs something deeper and a more strategic plan.
Kind of a little follow-up question to that would be, I think that it's a big letdown for people when they don't see the results, because we do have so many reviews,
Yeah.
like over 800 reviews of people being like, game changer, life changing,
Yeah.
turn my life around. And so like, what would you say is the difference in someone who's like seeing big results and a lot of symptom relief
Yeah.
versus someone who's just not?
Yeah. And that can create a lot of pain. This happens in my practice too. So again, I just want to like honor that feeling that can come up. People will read the testimonials on my website, and one of two things happens. They either feel like super hopeful and inspired by that, or they feel bad of like, is this even possible for me? It brings up doubt. Same thing with reviews on Maria. If they're a few months in and it hasn't worked and they're not that, person that's saying this changed my life, it brings up a lot of feelings. And what is the difference? Like, I think of like the physiology of that, really simply put, for those people that it was life changing, the nutrient depletion, the nutrient insufficiencies were a bigger piece of their puzzle. Or perhaps they had fewer underlying factors or contributing factors at play. And so it's as simple as that. For those that haven't worked, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the wrong supplement. It just means there's more going on, and there can be pain and grief around that. I see a lot of people with complex health histories, and there's a grieving process of like, this is where I'm at. My body is requiring all this extra support, and yeah, it's a lot to navigate at times.
Yeah, we're all such bio individuals, and what works for many doesn't work for all. So that's definitely frustrating, and I think can add a whole new layer on top too. And you've tried so many things, and you truly are stabbing in the dark. So we can empathize with you if you are out there experiencing that. And yeah, it's so hard to navigate.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, my own PMDD history was very, very layered. And I've talked about this on other episodes, but I had like underlying PCOS, and then I was on a birth control that worsened the PCOS, and gut health issues since childhood, and lots of genetic factors coming into play. A multivitamin alone certainly wasn't enough for me. However, I can feel a night and day difference within days of having nutrient support or not. I have a condition that really impacts my like B6 and zinc levels. I can feel a difference so quickly. And so again, it's a big piece of my puzzle, but I always had other pieces at the same time. And so anyone listening, I would just encourage you to like sit with this information and shift the question you're asking. So if you add a new supplement, Maria, or otherwise, rather than asking like, will this supplement fix me, or what supplement will fix me, instead ask, what is going on in my body and what does it need? That can really be a game changing question, because then we stop having that like chasing fixes, and we can actually start being really intentional with the things we're bringing in.
And so often we do know the answer. We're just not used to asking that question to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, we have amazing intuition, especially I think as females, our intuition is so amazing. But we have been in this system, especially the medical system, where we rely on someone else to tell us what we need, as opposed to checking in with ourselves and asking that questions of like, what do I think is my best next step? So if you're in that position, maybe just sit with yourself and get curious about it, and give yourself a couple of options and see what like feels good in your body. And a lot of times, like the body truly does know.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I ask like new clients coming into the practice, like, what is the number one thing that you need? Oftentimes they're thinking of like strategy and lab testing, but when it really comes down to it, they want validation. They want validation of some of the things they've already intuitively known, of like missing pieces of the puzzle. And that intuition is very, very real. And so that's why it's so important in this process, for us, of like hearing our client story, and for listeners listening to your own story and like holding that truth, and even holding that truth like extra firmly when you're in the doctor's office or talking to new practitioners. Really standing grounded in what you know about your body, and that you are the expert on your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, next question. I think you had mentioned that you had tried a bunch of birth controls for your PMDD. If someone listening is currently taking a birth control and it is supporting their PMDD, but they're wondering, could micronutrient support also be beneficial? What would you tell them?
Yes. Yes, 100%. So if birth control is supportive to someone, but it's leaving them with other symptoms, for some, micronutrient support could be the missing piece. There's other things in birth control that could also be having an impact. But simply put, like, birth control can deplete nutrients, B6, B12, folate, magnesium, zinc. All of these are absolutely essential for hormones, mood, energy, all of it. And so it's a really simple thing. It's like a layer of insurance or protection while on birth control. And I always remind people too, of sometimes they'll get lab results back and everything is normal, but it is not just full blown deficiencies in that medical range that matter. Even slightly low suboptimal levels of these nutrients can disrupt all those things that I just mentioned. And so really it's about replenishing what your body is losing due to the medication.
Yeah, I think, God, if I could just get into doctors' minds and be like, okay, great. Yeah, birth control has a place. But like if we're going to be offering birth control, we should also be educating them on like, here's the side effect of the nutritional element. And I want to make sure you're on a multivitamin too. Like
Mm-hmm.
they go hand in hand. They are best friends. We should,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's no harm in, or there's no like downside or
Mm-hmm.
hate against birth control. I think that birth control gets a bad rap in the hormone health space because a lot of people are talking about coming off birth control, or how detrimental it is to fertility. Like birth control is a tool that we have, and if it works for you, that's so amazing. But we should also be aware of these other elements to birth control and how it is affecting the body, and do what we can to offset that. And one of those things is just like replenishing those micronutrients. So I wish it was the prescription with birth control was also given with a recommendation for a multivitamin.
Yes. Well, we're working on that mission. I've been in OB offices, like educating on PMDD and, even sharing Maria with them. We went to a conference full of OBGYNs, like it is so, so important. And I think more and more are becoming aware of that importance of nutrition. It's just a matter of having like, what product can they confidently recommend? So
Totally.
times are changing. I have faith in that.
Yeah, huge part of our mission is just to help educate that landscape doctors on the nutritional needs, because all they know right now is like, well, if you want to get pregnant, you should take prenatal, and like there's more to it.
Yep.
On that note, like so often we hear from women, is it really that simple? Is it really that simple as like it just being a need for supporting nutrition? Is it just nutritional deficiency?
Yeah, such a good question. And the answer, like top line, boils down to sometimes, but not always. And I want to just say, as I share this answer, that I am the type of person where I'm like an overthinker and overanalyze. Like I just like research things as deeply as I possibly can. And I sometimes practice constraint and hold myself back of, we have to do the simplest things first, because I love the deep science. I love to look into all the interconnections, but we have to start simple and build that capacity along the way, as we've been talking about. And for some people, like those people writing those reviews of it being a game changer, it is as simple as nutritional deficiencies. And for others, there's more to it. And so, this is repeating what we've been saying, but it's a foundational step, and it's not a magic pill, but it can absolutely move the needle in a big way. And so I like to describe it as like nutrients are the nuts and bolts that make everything work. They're what make the gears turn in your body, neurotransmitter production, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, all of that, impacting hormone pathways. A lot of people will talk about hormone detox and they'll jump to a hormone detox protocol or supplement, but we have to make sure we're giving those pathways the nuts and bolts. And that is what deeply impacts, among other things, how we create, convert, and clear hormones. So they impact so much. And when we don't have those nuts and bolts, it's like your body is trying to function without the parts it needs to keep things running smoothly. I have a client example. I think we should go over that. It's a good example of this if we have time.
Yeah. Do you want to just dive into it now?
Yeah, she's a recent client from the UK, and she's such a good example of this, where really severe PMDD symptoms. We got her blood work back, and I had this moment of frustration when I saw her result of like, why in the world has nobody tested this for her before? I like, honestly, like I felt anger because she had incredibly low B12, like severely deficient B12, zinc, magnesium, folate, multiple nutrients across the board. And we started replenishing those nutrients based on her labs. And by the end of that first month, it was like she could see the light. She's like, what happened? My energy is coming back. It's like my brain's back online. Her focus had sharpened. Her intense mood symptoms weren't like running the show anymore. And we also were doing other things, supporting like the initial first steps that help everyone, supporting blood sugar, looking at her meal balance. We even talked about like she was getting back into doing farming and getting her hands in the dirt, and it's her purpose and all these things. But that gave her the capacity to do the next step. But again, that like frustration on my part came from of like, why had nobody looked at this before? Why am I the first person to do this? And that it just points to systemic and deeper issues. But we had to ask for her of like, why was she so depleted in the first place? Because the work doesn't stop there. It's like, wow, we found nutrient depletion as part of the root cause approach, as part of her puzzle. But those nutrient insufficiencies really have their own root causes. In her case, it was like genetic stuff impacting methylation and other things. She had major gut issues. Like we did a stool analysis and it was lit up like stealth gut infections, that all of that was impacting her nutrient absorption. So could it be as simple as nutrient deficiencies? Yes. And sometimes there's more underneath that and there's more work to be done. So hopefully that gives context of how powerful it can be, but that is not always everything.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that client story as well. And I think that I really love what you said, where we have to start with the more simple route, and we can start with, you know, replenishing micronutrients is an amazing place to start, because you don't even have to necessarily, and Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think that there is a place for doing the labs and doing the testing and getting a baseline, especially of your nutrients. But
Yes.
so many women want to jump to like, I need to test my hormones. I need to do the hormone
Mm,
testing. I need to know my nutrient levels right away. But there's not a huge harm in taking a quality multivitamin
mm-hmm.
and seeing how you feel after that. And maybe for you, it is as simple as that. And maybe you don't have to go and spend $600 to get your hormones tested too after that, because
Mm-hmm.
you're feeling better.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And I can give some examples of what I typically do with clients. We've formulated Maria to be that foundational support, even without testing. There are certain, nutrient support that we're going to want to check in and test. And that typically happens at nutrients at really, really high levels. So it's not recommended to take super high doses of vitamin D or super high doses of zinc without testing. But this type of foundational multivitamin is totally appropriate to take without lab testing first. And there can be individuality in how someone responds. And that's why I recommend, I tend to work with clients who are really sensitive. So we might start with a quarter scoop and then to half and gradually working up there. Some people can jump into the full scoop and do just fine. And with hormone testing, because it's sexy and people are talking about it, people often want to do that first. And I like to, in my practice, I start with comprehensive blood work. And then we oftentimes save the more advanced hormone testing for a few months down the line, when actually then we can see all the things that we've done. And then we see the way the hormones are performing at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that that's really helpful. So many women, go and spend so much money, and it truly could be as simple as, getting those micronutrients. So amazing. Into our next question. This is a funny one that, I have my very clear response that I give to people, that our team gives to people when we get this question, is like, okay, well, this just looks like another multivitamin. Like, what's in it to help PMDD specifically?
Yeah. How do you, I'm curious. I feel like my answer to this is a little spicy. I was like, ooh, let me get after this question, but I can give my perspective on this
Yeah,
because
do you want me to
we
share
heard,
what we say?
that's what let's compare our feelings about this.
For us, I respond with like, you're absolutely right. This is a multivitamin, and it's been formulated, for one, specifically for women. So when we're saying that, we're looking at research that's been based off of females, because there's so much research out there that's just for males, and utilizing that to understand what's actually going to benefit the female reproductive system in terms of women who are experiencing symptomatic cycles, as well as choosing forms of the nutrients that are more bioavailable. So you're going to get better results because you're actually utilizing those nutrients, and they're at higher dosages. That's, I think, like one of the most standout parts of our product, is if you put this in pill form, you'd still be taking like 6, 7 pills. This
Mm-hmm.
would be a routine that you would piece together. You'd be having your magnesium over here, and then you'd be having your B vitamins over
Yeah.
there. And that's one of the main reasons that we have a drinkable formula, is because if you see this, the size of the scoop, like that would take a couple of capsules, pretty big
Yeah.
capsules, to fit the powder in there. So
Mm-hmm.
we're really getting a therapeutic dosage of these nutrients in one simple scoop a day. Go out and try to find a magnesium product, even the like amazing sleep options out there, whether it's like the Moon Juice one or Calm or whatever brand of magnesium you're taking or have, like honestly probably less of a dose than what you're experiencing in Maria. And we're just giving you the nutrients you need at a higher volume. So that's kind of my answer, is that like, yes, it is a multivitamin. It's just like much more targeted for the audience we're speaking to.
Yeah. Yeah. Honorary nutritionist badge for you.
Thank you. Thank
Well,
you.
and I want to get into like a few examples of like research backed like nutrients and the levels of those nutrients in a little bit. But I think my spiciness around this answer, it comes from like this question. I think is asked so often because of big problems in the supplement industry, in my humble opinion. And so what I see is that there's a lot of brands out there, and these are often some of the supplements I take clients off when they first come because I can't be sure that they're helping. And sometimes I question if they're making things worse, but people will jump to PMDD focused blends or hormone blends or mood blends. They'll go straight for those sexier kind of hormone balancing ingredients, or like mood support blends that are not even specific to them, and they're not like addressing the surrounding environment. It's like pulling a bunch of levers at random, like hoping you pull the right one. And I see this time and time again of, someone might start Vitex, and for one person it's a game changer, and for the next person it like wreaked havoc on their life and they felt worse. And the same thing can go for Supplemento or Dim or these things that are in these hormone blends. And so we have to ask, like, is this the lever we want to pull for this individual? And so in the context of that, like supplement industry, people are expecting it to be a hormone specific blend like that, or a mood specific blend. And so I think that's sometimes why we get the question so often.
Yeah,
And
like what is the unique ingredient that's specific for PMDD? They're like looking for that thing. And I'll even say, like, we have made the conscious decision to not have those herbs like Dim or Vitex or St. John's wort or whatever it is that you may have heard are good for hormone support in this formula. And that's because, like, we truly believe that those should be taken under the watch of a practitioner, herbal practitioner, naturopath, whatever it be,
mm-hmm.
because those are more individualized, unique things that should not be taken long term.
Yeah. And we've had conversations, even texting back and forth, where you'll say, hey, what do you think of this supplement? And oftentimes, like when I look at it, they're like everything but the kitchen sink blends, where it's either not enough of the ingredients, or together it doesn't even mechanistically make sense. When we think about like what's the lever we want to pull, what pathway in the brain or hormones or whatever are we trying to influence, like the ingredients don't make sense together. They're just like these trendy things that are like people are looking at, and so they combine them into one thing. So and that can backfire, and that's where I just hate when that happens, because it adds to that hopelessness that we were talking about earlier. So I should we get into the specifics of the Maria? We don't talk about that enough on the podcast, I feel like.
Yeah, let's do it.
So just we'll do a few examples, but as you already covered the bioavailable forms, but calcium is a big one that people will look at. There's a lot of research surrounding calcium and PMDD, mood swings, fatigue, physical symptoms, and luteal phase. The research is around a range of like 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams. If you look at the Maria elixir, we included 500. And that's because that's the amount your body can absorb at one time. And most people get the other 500 through their diet. In my opinion, supplementing beyond that foundational dose of 500, we should be checking with lab testing, because calcium can do strange things in high amounts in the body. So that's a big one, well-researched, included, and you don't have to take all those extra capsules. Same thing with magnesium. I feel like with the power of social media, everyone knows about magnesium. It's one of the most common things people come to me on. Sometimes they're on cruddy forms, but more often I'm seeing people are getting more savvy and choosing the highly absorbable forms, but they might not be taking enough. They'll be taking one capsule when they actually need closer to 3 or 4. And the research really supports that. In between like 200 to 400 milligrams is most supportive of mood and sleep, and calming some of those PMDD symptoms. So those are 2 big ones. And then B6, we made a change in the formulation around this, where B6 is like power nutrient for mood. It really plays a big role in histamine pathways, hormone pathways. brain chemical, like it is required in a lot of like the conversions between things. The research amount is around 50 milligrams of pyridoxine HCl. We use 25 milligrams of the P5P form. So that's the activated form of B6. We don't need as much because it doesn't have to be converted by the liver. It's just more efficient. So that's why we didn't do such a high dose. And again, we want to give just enough of something, not too much. So we're not overshooting on the nutrients.
Question on the P5P, like you're saying, it doesn't have to get converted in the liver. And I'm wondering if there's like additional benefits there for the women out there who are maybe on or have been on birth control, because the liver does so much work with birth control. And if we're not having to utilize that to convert, like, do you think that it's conserving some level of liver energy? You might not even know the answer to this, but that's where my brain went.
With the P5P, it's interesting because there's not enough research on it. And like theoretically what you're saying makes sense, but like the research is more sparse. And so even when I like try to find studies that are like the amount to P5P, all of the studies are using the cheaper pyridoxine HCl form, and that form can benefit still a lot of people. It's not a bad form. But I don't know. I don't know if there's enough information, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think logically it's like, okay, if we're, avoiding the liver with this,
Mhm.
then maybe there's benefits there, that so we're not overworking that detox pathway or
Yeah.
conversion pathway. But
Yeah.
anyways, interesting.
Yeah. And of course, the formulation has more than those ingredients, but just some examples of the nutrients, the forms, the quality, the amounts. That's really, really important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's so helpful for people. Okay, we've talked a lot about the nutrients, nutritional deficiencies. We're going to kind of shift gears a little bit here and talk about less about Maria or supplement, more about the lifestyle changes of things, as well as some kind of PMDD through the life stages, if you will. So this is like, people come at us a lot of like, okay, you're claiming you have a hormone balancing supplement, whatever, a hormone supporting supplement. PMDD isn't a hormone imbalance. These
Mm-hmm.
people are right. Absolutely, it's not about a hormone imbalance. So, how can lifestyle changes that support balancing your hormones also help alleviate PMDD symptoms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's clear this up. So let's clear this up once and for all. And when anyone asks this question, we'll just like send them this snippet. And so absolutely, I love that people are even asking this because it reflects a deeper understanding that PMDD is not caused by a hormone imbalance. And I think it's really, really important because there's a key difference here. So in PMDD, just kind of going back to the basic science here, hormones are fluctuating and they're often within their normal ranges, but the brain and nervous system are hypersensitive to those fluctuations. And so it's not that the levels are off, it's like how your system is responding. And so I also think it's important to talk about that PMDD can coexist with hormonal imbalances. I want to make that part clear. I see it all the time. There can be things like estrogen excess or anovulatory cycles where people aren't ovulating, causing low progesterone. I see a lot of high androgens, so high testosterone, high DHT, things like that. And in those cases, hormone balancing, quote unquote, is really, really helpful. And that can actually reduce the PMDD symptoms because sometimes those things are exacerbating it. So that we'll get that part out of the way. But if we look back to like a lot of these things that are labeled as hormone balancing, like optimizing nutrients with Maria and blood sugar and sleep, those things are actually supporting the deeper systems that are often at the root of PMDD. So, and we have this Maria elixir isn't only for PMDD. That's why you use some hormone language on your website and in your education and everything. There's a lot of people with PMS taking it that do not have PMDD, other hormone related conditions. So we want to reach all the people in the way that we're talking. But from a PMDD perspective, those nutrients can affect neurotransmitter production, hormone metabolism, methylation, inflammation, etc. It can, the blood sugar stability can create stress in the body and amplify mood symptoms. I even see a lot of people will come and report cravings during luteal. I've had a handful of clients where CGMs, like continuous glucose monitors, and follicular versus luteal, and we can see the different ways their body's regulating blood sugar. Huge impact on mood. And then things like gut health imbalances, of course, can play a role. And so all those things I just mentioned are supportive of hormone balance, and they also support the underlying systems that are often out of balance and disrupted with PMDD. So both things are true at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's really common for us as individuals to think of our health and our systems in our body as separate, because that's how the medical system has trained us to think. You go and you see different doctors for different areas of the body. But this is so all like interconnected, and our hormones are just the messengers between the different systems. So it makes sense that the hormone balancing lifestyle factors are beneficial not just for your hormones, but if you think about your nervous system, you talked about neurotransmission, inflammation in the body, gut health. It's like getting better sleep, reducing stress, balancing blood sugar. Those aren't just like hormone balancing things. That's like whole body health. So I think it's really just like even training the Gen Pop that these are things that are going to be beneficial across the board. And while, yes, if you're experiencing hormonal symptoms, it's going to alleviate that. It's also just like kind of support longevity and your overall health.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we cleared that up.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it just like takes a transition of our minds about how we think about our health.
Yeah.
And it can be so confusing because you want to narrow it down and you want to focus on like what's going to help just your hormones, but overall it's like a larger system.
Yeah. And that's why like one of the most important parts of my job is like making that clear, or helping that be clear to our clients so they understand the why behind what they're doing. And oftentimes, let's say if we're working on gut health, they'll say, I thought we were like gonna work on my cyclical mood symptoms and the PMDD stuff. And then it's like that re-education of how it all connects, and understanding that why is really motivating, because you start to understand how all the dots connect, and then how that impacts the symptoms that are plaguing people the most. But yeah, we have to peel back all those layers.
Totally. This is a great question, I think, because, there's a lot of people that we hear from, myself included, who experience PMDD from like an early age. It was like very early when they got their period, and it has become this like quote unquote, I hate to call this, but like life sentence, if you will, of like experiencing PMDD throughout the menstrual years. But then we also hear from people, I had really normal periods, everything was great. And then all of a sudden I'm developing what feels like PMDD. So can PMDD start later in life?
Yes. And it is more common than people think. And it's so common that like the first question I ask people like is, when did this all start? And we start to look at their timeline of all the factors that came in. And I can't even count, talking with hundreds and hundreds of people with PMD, I can't even count how many have shared it didn't happen after this pregnancy, but it happened after this pregnancy, or it happened with this big life transition, or this big stressor, or this trauma. And then for some people, and I almost feel like it's even less common, for some people, it's like, oh, this has started since I got my first period or since I was a teenager. And so it really varies, and it's sometimes talked about as something you like have or don't, like you mentioned with the life sentence, but the truth is more complex. And so this sensitivity to these hormone fluctuations can absolutely develop at different points across the lifespan, including later in life. So common triggers are coming off birth control, which we'll get into, after pregnancy or miscarriage, perimenopause, or following a major stressor, trauma, or illness. So with these big shifts, there can be a shift in how the brain responds to the hormonal fluctuations, even if those hormone levels are still normal. Or there can be all these factors converging to create the perfect storm that make the body less resilient and like set the stage for PMDD to come out of the woodwork. So it is absolutely possible. And if anyone listening, like their symptoms didn't show up until their 30s or 40s, you're not imagining it. A lot of times people will come and they'll have challenges getting the diagnosis from their doctor, um, because they're further along and they're not looking at that full picture. They're not looking at that timeline I mentioned in the beginning.
Yeah, and there's another side of that too, where people who have PMDD are very nervous about upcoming hormonal changes. For example, I think a really common one is someone has PMDD, gets pregnant. So a lot of times during pregnancy, those symptoms go away because you're no longer cycling. And then with postpartum depression, there's a big concern with things worsening. So what's happening there?
Yeah, and it is very possible that that postpartum window can either trigger PMDD for the first time or worsen pre-existing symptoms, or there can be a higher, let's say, risk towards developing postpartum anxiety or depression. And so we'll talk about the science behind why, but I always want to say this clearly to help people find a little bit of safety in their body, in their cycle, going into something like pregnancy, or even if they're deciding if they want to have children. Not everyone who gives birth will like get PMDD or experience PMDD. Not everyone with PMDD who gives birth will have postpartum depression or anxiety, and not everyone will have PMDD that worsens. There's so many factors that involved, and I feel like the universe served up my story on a platter to like make this point, because after my first baby, my PMDD symptoms actually improved postpartum. And what had happened was I had one of the worst PMDD episodes of my life, even in intensive outpatient, all of that, medical leave. Before my first baby, I did a lot of groundwork to stabilize, got pregnant, and then I only had mild postpartum anxiety. After I had twins, there was a lot of factors, birth trauma, health complications. That's a story for another day, but I had severe postpartum anxiety. And I actually had a resurfacing of my PMDD symptoms, and then I was able to stabilize again. And so it's just an example that there's can be all these factors, but it's not a given. And I my hope is to help people feel safe going in, find that stability going in, to trust their body a little bit more, and then whatever does arise, to trust that they have the support to handle it. So I think that's just important before we get into the science.
I hope too people are hearing you say that you were able to stabilize again, and that maybe we can ignite a little bit less of the victim mentality that can occur in the PMDD space of like, I'm never going to be able to get out of this, and the fear, and hearing that like it is so possible to go from feeling like you have things under control for things to spiral back out of control, and then for you to regain a little bit of that relief and balance and ground to stand on that's stable. So if you're listening, it's a roller coaster. It goes up and down. But I think that holding on to the mentality of I can get this back under control can
Yeah.
be really empowering for people,
Yeah.
as opposed to it just, again, being like a life sentence, a trap. So thank you for sharing that, you've had the ups and the downs and the changes, and you've been able to restabilize. And I think like month to month, we can even think of it in that way. Some months are going to be worse than others, even if you're laying the groundwork and doing all the things. Like our lives aren't stable all the time. And with that comes changes to this disorder as well. And just instead of, showing up for that instability, and I mean, there will be crumbling for sure, but having some confidence and knowing that, and even approaching it, I think, with curiosity of like what was different this month, can be kind of like supportive in a mindset state.
Yeah, and it's I think it's so essential, and this is why, like, and anyone I talk to in anything I put on the internet, I don't take on the like cure mindset. I think that's dangerous. I it ruffles my feathers when people talk about it in that way because I I want people to go in empowered with a dose of realism. We have clients that experience immense relief, 90+% relief sometimes, and I'm still coaching them to attune to their bodies, to notice if they have a cycle that seems like a blip on the radar where things destabilize, so they can ask that question, have that curiosity. What shifted? What happened? This still happens to me today. And this is like my life's work where something will get stirred up in my body or major stressors. And I'll have some hard cycles. And I know I have my toolbox to support myself through the symptoms. I know how to go back to the data to stabilize my body again. And I used to have this like crippling fear when I would notice my symptoms increase of like, oh my God, it's back. What am I going to do? I'm going to crash again. My life's going to fall apart. And it took me years of coaching and supporting myself through that now I say, that's interesting. That kind of sucked. And I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And that is like, I get goosebumps thinking about it because that's the confidence and the safety in their body I want my clients to have. And we build that into the process. So they can feel safe, so they can go and live their lives, and it's not consumed that this by this fear of the PMDD symptoms.
Yeah. I think replacing the fear with curiosity is just like such a learned skill, and it's still so challenging, but practicing it can be so beneficial and soothing. It's like what our nervous system needs
Yeah,
so
yeah,
often. Okay,
absolutely.
back to the life stages kind of triggering
Yes,
PMDD. Do we want to talk about kind of some of the specifics around
yeah,
some of them? So maybe like I just had a baby, and can this be triggering PMDD because what that person's experiencing feels like PMDD?
yeah. And if we look what we know about the PMDD brain specifically and what happens during pregnancy, it makes a lot of sense. So with PMDD, so we have progesterone, it converts to something called allopregnanolone or allo, and that's a calming neurosteroid. It impacts and interacts with the GABA receptors in the brain. And I think of it like a calming break to the nervous system, regulates mood, reduces anxiety, makes us feel stable. During pregnancy, those hormone levels rise, they're high and they stay high. Progesterone and allo are both at very high levels. And oftentimes that's why people report feeling more stable. But after delivery, there's this like sharp hormone drop, a crash even, and that includes that drop in allo and progesterone. And so in a non-PMDD brain, the brain is like, all right, I got this. Those GABA receptors adjust to that withdrawal. In the PMDD brain, the brain doesn't do that. It doesn't adapt appropriately. And that can lead to increased anxiety, mood instability, the stress sensitivity, insomnia, all of that. And so there's an element of normalcy in the baby blues in almost everyone immediately after birth when those hormones drop. But the experience of that can either be more intense for people with PMDD or it can arise with all the hormone shifts that take place postpartum. So it's a matter of like with the research, it really looks at like those GABA receptors and how much plasticity there is. Can they change and adapt? So that's part of what happens. The other part, zooming out a bit, is think of all the things that happen as your body is making that baby, and all the things that happen postpartum. There's nutrient depletion, oftentimes extreme sleep deprivation, especially if you have twins like me, and or my first baby was worse at sleep. There's immune and inflammatory shifts. Sometimes there's shifts in thyroid function. And then there's a lot of emotional processing that happens. If trauma is present, shift in identity, shift in schedules and routine, there's a lot going on. And so absolutely, like all of these changes again can create that perfect scenario where those symptoms can arise. But again, it's not a given. It has to do with how vulnerable we are to that going in, and all the factors at play: genetic, hormonal, inflammatory, trauma, all these things combined.
And would something like in that instance, nutrition has to be a beneficial option for that person, right?
Yeah, I think about that postpartum time, the fourth trimester, as people call it. And I do think nutrition plays a big role. In the ideal scenario, people are supported before pregnancy and during and after with nutrients. And if you're on a prenatal that works for you, continue it in that postpartum journey, in the breastfeeding journey. Have your doctor check back in on your iron and vitamin D levels. Really advocate for yourself to have your thyroid retested, all those things. And so nutrition can absolutely play a role. And then I sometimes question of like, how different would this be? And this like looks at the societal lens, if people having babies had more support and more of an opportunity to rest and sleep and all these nourishing, replenishing things that happen. And that's just not the society we live in, but that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, totally. And another trigger for PMDD can be, or can it be, birth control and removing that from your regimen?
Yeah, really important question. And I would say the short answer is yes, but not in the way that most people think, in my opinion. And so it's not necessarily that birth control can cause PMDD out of nowhere. It can unmask what was already there because the birth control had been suppressing those hormones. And so and honestly, even it doesn't even work for everyone, but for someone who it is working to suppress PMDD symptoms, those hormones are flattened, and that way the brain isn't as sensitive to those hormonal fluctuations taking place. Now, if you're like me, I had certain types of birth control that made my symptoms worse. I do not respond well to the synthetic progestins. I had other types that made the PCOS worse and made my testosterone levels go higher. And so it's important to keep that in mind. But for someone where it is creating stability, when you stop, your natural cycle resumes, those fluctuations and hormones come back online, and the brain can respond to those. And then thinking again, bigger picture, if there's other underlying vulnerabilities, the nutrient depletion, as we keep saying, chronic stress, trauma, inflammation, gut, genetics, your system may have a harder time buffering those new hormone shifts. Hopefully that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I think that that's a really good perspective for people too. And thank you for explaining like if it's working for you or if it's not and the differences there. There's obviously so much information. People go on the internet looking for what's going to help, and what works for one doesn't work for all. So keeping that in mind and understanding kind of some of those differences can be really helpful.
Yeah. And the other factor, and this is not to, you know, talk too negatively about birth control. As we said before, it has its place, it's a tool, and it helps a lot of people. But for some people, birth control itself is contributing to that perfect storm because of how it impacts gut health and liver health and neurotransmitters. For some, there's like this like surge of hormones that happens after it, like surge of testosterone that can lead to irritability and anxiety. So there's a lot of pieces to this. But coming back to the simple answer of yes, it's absolutely possible. And I would recommend, giving it a few months to stabilize, giving yourself at like 3 cycles to see how you feel off birth control, to like, what is your normal status quo without that influence? And yes, evaluate those 3 months, but even evaluating after that is more important to see what your body's doing on its own, because the answer is not always going back on birth control. Sometimes it's just that invitation to look deeper, to look underneath and see what your body actually needs.
And I'm curious if you're kind of recommending that 3 month transition period. Is that due to that length of time where it takes for the corpus luteum and follicle to become dominant? Like we really want to wait that 90-day period to allow for the dominant follicle that's been supported through those 3 months to come. And that's what's releasing our hormones. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it takes time for that process to get back into sync and for things to regulate. So that's absolutely why. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so many people don't realize that and they're expecting benefits immediately by the next cycle. And while you can see some benefits that quickly with the right support, it's like, you know, the hormones being released into our body, it really does take that long for us to have the support and the consistency along the way. So just know that like 3 months is a good kind of length of time if you've added something into your routine, whether it be a
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle change, nutrients, whatever, to really kind of see how that's supporting you. And I even think about that, like when I'm like, okay, had a bad cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm going to be more mindful and know
Yeah.
that like 3 months from now is when I might see the benefit. Or like I had a
Mm-hmm.
really bad allergic reaction in January and I'm just
Mm-hmm.
kind of now getting back to a baseline because of that quote unquote like illness or flare up or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's so impactful that I even use that to help decide on testing timing with my clients. If we're going to test hormones post birth control, or if we've added hormone specific supplements into the mix, I wait at least 3 cycles to see the full impact of that. And even this is a strange little side note. Monica and I had severe histamine reactions at the same time. That could be a whole, we've done a histamine podcast, but we should do an episode on this. But full body hives, and it happened to us at the same time. Quite strange. My cycles now are still a bit disrupted from that, where during around ovulation I just wake up with this like visceral anxiety, like that the world is ending for no reason at all, and I can feel it. It's like my body still hasn't recalibrated from that strong, such a strong immune response, a strong histamine response.
Yeah, I was even just saying this morning how my skin is finally clear again because
Mm-hmm.
from that histamine response, from that kind of like inflammation in my body, immune response, all of that, my skin flared up so badly. And I'm not someone who's like really experienced acne. I'll get the pimple here or there, whatever. But I had like full chin acne to the point where I like felt like I had to wear makeup all the time. And just last night, I was like, oh my God, we're going out to dinner and I'm not going to put on a lick of makeup because my skin finally feels good. And it took from January until now and it's April. So it takes time. It takes time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, last kind of life stage that we're going to talk about, and it's one that is getting more spotlight. Thank goodness. I'm becoming more curious about it. I'm sure our audience is becoming more curious about it, but perimenopause. I think that there's a lot of questions out there about the transition that occurs in perimenopause and people wondering, am I developing PMDD, or like has there been a trigger that's created PMDD, or is what I'm experiencing just the transition to perimenopause?
Yeah. This is a tricky question, and we'll talk about a few possible scenarios. But yeah, menopause is kind of having a moment, like in general on social
And
media.
thank God it is.
Yeah, there's like books coming out, everyone's talking about, and I'm like, great timing. I'm turning 40 this year, like probably entering into perimenopause, and yeah, it's having a moment. And so 50,000 foot view, all those things that you outlined are possible. So perimenopause can cause mood symptoms in anyone, even those without PMDD. So there can be shifts in irritability, low mood, anxiety, sleep, brain fog, all those sorts of things. Um, and this can happen due to the hormonal fluctuations. For people with a history of PMDD, it is also possible that symptoms can worsen during perimenopause because those hormone fluctuations become more erratic. And it can also be true that PMDD is triggered for the first time during perimenopause. And this is a little harder to untangle which is which. But that could happen if, again, that perfect storm scenario, the sensitivity was masked and kind of comes out of the woodwork due to all the factors going on with health. Um, so yeah, overview, all those things can be possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure for people listening who have this question, it might be a frustrating answer, which makes sense. What would you recommend to someone who is starting to experience heightened mood symptoms and is curious if this is perimenopause or if they're developing PMDD?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is tracking your cycle, but let's talk about why and understand like what's happening in the body so the tracking data makes sense. And so during perimenopause, first to understand like what is actually taking place, those hormone fluctuations become more intense and less predictable. And there's a shift, like the progesterone levels decline faster than the estrogen levels decline. And estrogen is not all bad. We need estrogen. It has very favorable impacts actually on mood. But when there's an imbalance in that ratio, that can lead to those symptoms. Ovulation can also become less predictable. Some cycles you might ovulate, other cycles you might not. You might ovulate sometimes on day 9 and other cycles on day 14. And that can be really distressing to especially people with PMDD, because it's like they used to like be able to plan ahead and cope, and all of a sudden it's like everything's all over the place, and that feels really stressful. But there's this hormonal roller coaster that happens for someone with a PMDD sensitive brain. That hormonal roller coaster can amplify symptoms. So how do we tell the difference between the two? And if, as you're cycle tracking, if the symptoms are like predictable and cyclical with like whatever your PMDD pattern is, of like they occur 1 week before the cycle or 2 weeks, or their ovulation more and then come back in luteal, whatever your pattern is, if it's cyclical like that, oftentimes it can be related to PMDD. And PMDD can like ease up at some point during the bleed. Everyone's different. For some people, it's like boom, first drop of blood, better. Others, it lingers a bit more. But if symptoms are like linked to a lot of the other perimenopausal symptoms, sleep disruption, night sweats, vaginal dryness, all of that, and it's like very random, of like you can like feel those surges happen as those other symptoms occur, that, and it's happening for the first time, that could be more aligned with perimenopausal mood changes. And some people will, ask their doctor, to test their like hormone signal levels of like the LH, FSH to get more clarity. But that tracking of the timing of the symptoms is a first powerful step for that clarity. And I want to like add a little side note. We're talking about symptoms specifically to answer this question. But what I love about that, like, menopause movement that's happening, is it's actually being talked about in a very favorable way. There's this, I think it's being talked about almost as like a spiritual transition, like this, like evolving into this like wiser person that you're becoming. And so that's a whole separate conversation, but I don't want to lose sight of that. There's like this invitation and welcoming in the perimenopausal years, in the menopausal years, that can be quite beautiful. And so my hope is, yes, it's important to look at the symptoms, address them, but also not to over medicalize, over pathologize something that is supposed to happen in our body. So just had to plug that in there.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. I think even for me, I'm hearing that and I'm being like, oh, okay. This isn't something to be fearful of or scared of. It's normal. All women transition through this.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, again, right, having that curiosity of like, is this happening? What is my experience with that happening? And what is my ability to change the, not even necessarily change, but support the process?
Yeah.
And from my understanding, supporting that transition is really similar to supporting your cycle too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the same things come into play, whether it be the lifestyle benefits of being mindful of blood sugar balance and sleep and stress, as well as nutritional support. So, do you have any thoughts on kind of the support for that transition?
Yeah, it really depends on the person, and what's behind it, what's driving it. I'll use myself as an example. For me, I have like genetically and related to some stuff happening with my gut health, I have challenges with estrogen detox, and that can sometimes trigger my histamine related symptoms. And so for me, it becomes really essential to support those estrogen detox pathways, not because that's the only thing causing PMDD symptoms, but it's a factor that plays a big role that I suspect will get harder initially during perimenopause, and I'm going to have to be more intentional with my support. I think it's going to be different for everyone, where some people are going to benefit from all the foundational things we've been talking about all day. Some people are going to, benefit from like mood specific support to balance out either brain chemistry or stabilize the like receptors for those brain chemicals, so they can so you can handle those hormonal fluctuations. And so I think it's where it becomes a bit more nuanced in the specifics, but those foundational things that help everyone help here. Blood sugar balance. We become more insulin resistant as we head into perimenopause and menopause. That is always, it's important for PMDD, and it's important for perimenopause. It's important for every darn person out there. And so it's just an example of all these foundational layers we've been talking about factor into this too. And then from there, whatever's left and remaining that someone's still struggling with, that's sometimes where that specificity comes in.
One of the things I'm hearing from you too is that if we can understand the root cause for us today, so say you're still menstruating and you can learn and uncover some root cause today, it's going to help you later too to kind of know where some of that severity might occur for you and what you can do about it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's when people come to me with fear about, I'm thinking of having a baby, this is my fear, or I'm, this age and I'm worried about perimenopause, I really center them back in on, this is what we've uncovered already. This is what is helping you. That brings your body stability, and it will continue to do so. Anything else that shows up, we need to address what's at play. There can be, health is ever changing, but when we know those pillars of support and can maintain those and have consistency with that, anything else that comes in to disrupt health, it doesn't take as strong of a hold, and we're more resilient as we address that smaller factor. And that there could be so many things that come up. So it's really, really important to kind of stay centered around that, so that we're not anticipating and fearing what these transitions might bring.
Yeah. Yeah, you're never too late to the party and you're never too early. It's just like show up where you are and learn what you can.
Yes, that's a good note to end on. And like at whatever point you're joining the party, honoring whatever feels come up about that. Excitement, hopefulness, sometimes grief that you didn't join the party sooner. That is all normal, and part of your story.
Yeah, any final words of wisdom, Mandy, for anyone listening today?
Yeah, I would like to end on that reminder of curiosity. I think having that curious mindset helps us not to be taken over by symptoms, not to fuse with our symptoms where they feel like that's all that exists. When we can hold that curiosity and that trust in our body and the message it's trying to send us, I actually find that can bring relief and comfort in the moment. And it also can give hope for what's next.
Well, amazing. I think that is a great place for us to end today's episode. Mandy, thank you so much. You brought so much to the table today. For anyone listening, where can they find you or learn more about your practice?
Yeah, my practice is called Reveal Functional Nutrition, and we have a whole team of PMDDers helping PMDDers, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And so you can look up my name online, Mandy Rother, look for Reveal Functional Nutrition. Once in a while, a few times a year, I post on social media. And so I'm there as well at mandyrother.rd. Yeah, and if you have more questions as you're listening to this, I have a contact form on my website where you can submit a question or throw them towards Maria. We'd love to keep supporting you. And there's tools and resources on the website, cycle trackers, all of that, blog articles, lots of stuff, if you want to head on over.
Dive deep, my ladies. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We are so excited to share this with you and to bring more awareness around PMDD.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.